Some of them, their social skills are so poor that navigating a university environment will be difficult for them. My sister's friends have an autistic boy who is now about 22. He's living in their basement. I think he goes to university, but is he ever going to get out of their basement? I don't know. I don't know if he's got the life skills that he really needs in terms of navigating the social world to be able to really function well out in society. You have to know how to go into restaurants and order food. I mean, Temple Grandin, I heard a story about Temple Grandin where she went into a restaurant with somebody, marched into the kitchen and placed her order and came back and sat down. And the person sitting with her said, you know, did you know that you have to wait for the waiter to go? Oh, I had no idea. Like that was what she thought you did in restaurants. You marched into the kitchen and gave your order. So those are the kinds of things, like you could get people annoyed at you. Another story I heard was of a guy hearing a baby cry, and he looked over, there was no mom beside the baby. He knows you don't sit there and leave babies cry, so he went over and picked the baby up. Well, what kind of trouble is that going to land you in? You know, you're looking at prison. So it's those social gaps, and I think people like the law enforcement people don't necessarily get what autism looks like. They get somebody, well, you know, you got to toe the line. Stop being so rude to me. They're autistic. They don't know any better. They don't get that. So that's puzzling. Those are the kind of things they have to navigate.
The one guy said that having his condition is a curse.
Yeah.
And also that he can be targeted negatively. I was wondering, what's the best way to have the class understand his condition and prevent him from being targeted?
Well, you know, and again, this depends on the age. A lot of kids are targeted for different reasons, right? We're hoping to move towards a less bullying kind of society. I think from an early age, creating that acceptance and understanding of each other is kind of the first thing. We do things like, we do presentations in the class on, we'll do presentations just on individual differences, we'll do presentations on autism. We will talk to the kids about the strengths that this kid has, you know. We all have different smarts. There's actually a fabulous book called You Are a Social Detective, and it's a Michelle Winner resource. And the reason it's so good is because it talks about all the different ways, all the different strengths people have, and it focuses on social smarts. And sometimes people have good social smarts, and sometimes they don't. They have good math smarts. Like, it kind of helps to put that in perspective. We all have things we're good at. We all have things we're not so good at. And it depends on the age. I mean, that book is really designed for younger kids, and it's easier to get that message through to younger kids. As the kids get older, it gets harder and harder. In one of our high schools, we have a social thinking course happening based on the Michelle Winner stuff and some of the peers stuff. Like they've incorporated all these different programs into it to try and get kids to learn the social skills they need. But it is kind of working on the population as a whole from a young age and getting them to understand that. It's really hard to stop them being a target because their behavior sets them up. We actually have a classroom in one of my schools right now where there is one kid who's a really different kid. I don't know him. I haven't been asked to be involved with him. I don't know if he's on the spectrum or not, or if he's potentially on the spectrum. But he's totally targeted by the whole class. And as a class, they're really frustrated. The teachers are super frustrated with the class for their targeting of him and like the deliberate isolation that's happening around it. So it is a problem. And it's going to happen. It's a matter of trying to deal with it as it comes up and educate the kids. And starting from the get-go with the acceptance of others and teaching all kids to be accepting. There isn't an easy answer to that, for sure. I don't know. I'm trying to think back as I talk is whether or not it was Liam's perception that he was really targeted. I don't really know. Maybe in high school, I think in his early years, I've known him since he was 8, and in his early years, he certainly had lots of acceptance. And that may have changed as he got older. Even up until middle school, he was pretty accepted. So yeah. And helping these guys in the classroom. Now, you guys are familiar with the response to intervention. Yeah?
I just had a quick question. I know that a teacher's philosophy should be that no class is inherently bad and that there's usually a reason for behaviors. But you ever see consistently like behaviors like this, things that you're describing, and the child does not have a condition that's responsible for the behaviors? Like, when do you know when to differentiate?
I'm not so sure it's that important to differentiate. But because I don't think, behavior's never random. It's communicating something. It might not be communicating that they have autism. It might be communicating that my life is falling apart at home. If you look at a kid with a behavior issue, and I mean, I actually really hate the word behavior, by the way, because it tends to have negative connotations. I mean, we all use it, I use it, but it's not a real positive word in today's world. But if we take a kid who's got some behavioral issues, and you know it's not autism, and you know it's not, we've looked at language processing, we've looked at all these other things, you just have to keep taking the data and making the connection, figuring out what's going on here. It might be that there is stuff going on at home. It might be that they have attachment disorder, and that's one that does come up a fair amount in today's world. It exists, and it causes similar kinds of things. Actually, attachment disorder, I've seen sensory issues come from that. I've seen a lot of social issues come from that. Certainly escalations happen in kids with attachment disorder.
What is that?
Pardon?
Attachment disorder.
Attachment disorder is kids who have not had enough secure attachment, especially in their early years, in their developmental years. This is Gordon Neufeld, you guys? Yeah, this is Gordon Neufeld's whole philosophy of dealing with children is based on the whole attachment theory. And it actually has had a lot of credence in the last few years with the research on the brain and showing how important the early attachment is on kids. Kids who are adopted, the later they're adopted, the more likely they are to have attachment issues. And they can be, with providing lots of attachment to the kids, you can make a difference to them. But it does create differences in the brain, and it creates a lot of anxiety in the brain that you kind of constantly have to deal with. So, but those kids, what I have found when the kids have attachment disorder, I think it just impacts their whole neurological system. It puts them in this state of kind of fight or flight a lot of the times, and they're very reactive often. And I have seen a lot of sensory issues in them, and I'm thinking that's probably related to some of the same brain parts that are affected in autism that affect the sensory system are probably affected with attachment disorder. But I think you always search for the reason. Always start with the reason. When we get behavior problems brought to school-based team, our first question is, let's figure out why the behavior is happening. Why is it? Now, if we already know the kid is autistic, say, we have that big picture reason, but we need to sort out exactly what the circumstance is causing that specific behavior at that time. So, yeah. So, I guess the answer would be, there's always an explanation of some sort. Rarely do kids come in just wanting to take you off. So, what happens, especially in today's world with our response to intervention model, there is pressure to keep them in the class, right? Like we have to keep these kids in the class. We don't have a place to send them to go out and be fixed. Barb was telling me about a book that you guys had that described a student who had some sort of condition and then was sent, I didn't read the book, but she described it to me, went to some sort of place that was fixed and put on medication and came back. That's not real. Not here. That maybe happens in some places in the States. I don't know. But it doesn't happen here. It's not real. They're not going anywhere. They are in your class and they will be staying there. There isn't a lot of choices. Yeah?
Isn't I think the book is kind of like where he goes to get fixed is a like Ledger House or something.
A Ledger House thing, yeah.
Other.
Woodlands.
Well, Past Woodlands is a little bit different. Like that's just an alternate form of education for those kids who are in kind of a very highly anxious state and they can't cope with regular system. It's not really a place where they go and get fixed. Like Ledger House would probably be more of a
yeah, because it was kind of like a hospital thing,
right,
where he was learning how to deal
okay.
and medication.
I don't think in reality the boy was getting fixed. I think it was his own thoughts of, oh, I'm going here to get fixed.
Okay,
It was
okay.
his
I don't know, I
own-
didn't read the book. That was just
Yeah.
kind of what kind of Barb told me. I'm kind of like, well, we don't send them away to get fixed. But Ledger House, what Ledger House does it's very seldom you get a kid these days who goes to Ledger House. It's really rare. I've seen maybe 3 in the last 10 years. Like, it's really rare that kids go there. They do like a very full assessment of the kid. It's really intensive. And then they send them back with recommendations. And the idea is, and sometimes they medicate them, but not always. The idea is that hopefully if we implement all these recommendations, we will be able to help this kid survive in regular school. In a lot of ways, when you think about it, don't you think school is kind of an unnatural place in many ways? Like, that's not how we function out in later life. Like, it's kind of an unnatural place, and we're asking kids to function in an environment that's not, I don't know, not that natural. Anyway, that's just my thought. Now, there are medications that kids are sometimes put on to help reduce anxiety and so forth. Usually medication is not the answer to the situation. It can help. The little guy who was trashing rooms, it did help him to cope with things, but it didn't solve it because it was after he was on medication that he damaged the computer. It can be part of a bigger picture. And if a child is put on medication and it is working, then that's a beautiful time to go in and teach them strategies to cope with the difficulties they're having. Usually the medication is more of a temporary solution if they're put on it. As their bodies grow and change, their needs for the medication may not be effective anymore. It may start doing weird things to them. I also don't know now, but at one point, a few years ago, I know that they hadn't done a lot of research on medication in the under 18 crowd. And they were putting kids on this medication and not really knowing what it was doing to them, which was always a big concern for me. I'm not a real advocate of medication. I think there's a lot of limitations to it, and we have to be careful if we get a kid on medication, and if it's working, we still need to teach them strategies. We still need to teach them to cope with their environment. Just because they're not acting out at this moment now because they're medicated doesn't mean they don't need those strategies still. They still need the strategies. And that's actually a good time because they're calm. If they're calm, we can teach them. But very often there's no medication that can help these guys. That's really common. And in that RTI model, the teachers are the ones who have to try the strategies first. You have to have kind of a toolkit of strategies that you need to try before you start pulling in other people for them. That is just how our system is. Yep?
Just got two quick questions. We find there's more males or boys that are more on the spectrum than females.
Yeah.
Why is that? And are there more routine tendencies for boys as opposed to girls? Or
Routine tendencies?
like, is there things that boys may have more outbursts, or is this not we see more in boys as opposed to girls?
Well, the autism is more prevalent in boys, definitely. It's something like 5 to 1. I can't remember the exact statistics on it. It's definitely more prevalent in boys, and I don't know why. And they still don't really have a handle on the cause of autism, and until they start reaching that level of understanding of the cause, I don't think we're going to really find out why more boys than girls have it. In terms of the way it manifests, I think in the lower, like the level 1, level 3, okay, I can't remember, level 3 is the lower ones. They are the ones with those guys. I don't think it matters in boys or girls. I don't think the way it manifests is much different. I have seen very few high-functioning autistic kids, just like 2 or 3. Do they look different? You know, I don't think, in my mind, they probably are differences. Tony Atwood is one of kind of the gurus of autism, especially the high-functioning ones, the Asperger's type ones. And he talks about girls on the spectrum. So there probably is some differences, or maybe it's that they have to cope with different types of things. With the kids I know, I don't see huge differences in how it manifests in them. But then, I don't know, I'm just dealing with autism as I see it. I'm not really sure on the differences. Like I said, I would have to read that Tony Atwood book about it. Yeah.
I know one time they were saying, like, when they go through puberty, that it changes a bit, and sometimes they become either more aggressive or less aggressive. Are they still seeing that?
I haven't heard
Okay.
that. I don't know the answer to that. It's interesting, like that's making me think about what I've seen. I don't know. I haven't, the kids that I've seen, the aggression part is part of the escalation, right? They're anxious, they're angry, they're escalated, and they are in a reaction. It's a reaction. And the aggression is more that part of it. It's not related to necessarily how they deal with things. And the kids that I've seen that start out aggressive I haven't seen them with so much aggression as they get older. So, yeah, I'm not really sure though. So we often see these kids in class with no EA support. And you have to know too, I don't see support as meaning EA support. Often, having an EA glued to their hip is probably the worst thing we can do to some of these kids. But nonetheless, it is often very helpful for a teacher to have another adult in the room to help them support, not just with the kid on the spectrum, but with any of these other kids that are struggling in there. So the strategies that you use, the way you set your classroom up, the types of ways you interact with the kids, the strategies that you use are going to be far more important than just gluing an EA to the kid's hip. Ultimately, we want these kids to be as independent as possible, to learn as much as they can, and to in some way be as contributing a member of society as they possibly can. And I think when you're teaching these kids, that is kind of a long-term goal to think in terms of, it's bigger than just getting them through this year. We're trying to teach them skills and strategies that we want them to have through life, and things that they can fall back on, and things that make them as independent as they're able to be, no matter how high they're functioning. So even when we're taking some really low functioning kids and we're teaching them to sweep the floor, which might take 6 months because we have to walk them through the process really slowly, we're still trying to give them something that they have a way of contributing. Maybe they will sweep the floors in their group home. It's part of that whole picture. How can we make them as independent as they're able to be? With the higher functioning kids who have difficulty with those subtle nuances of social skills, and we know that they're going to walk out the door and they're going to just have all these terrible social experiences without someone coaching them constantly, we're going to want to give them as many of those social skills as we can to try and make them more independent socially. So that's kind of the thing to keep in mind. So this was the discussion we just had a minute ago about behavior. It is our job, especially the younger the kid, the more important it is that it be our job. We were hoping as kids get older that they are able to better explain their own reasons if they've got good enough language skills to be able to start explaining why they're doing what they're doing. There's no such thing as just behavior. There is always a reason for it. As a teacher, we have this RTI model going on, but you still have access to your specialists. If you're really puzzled by the reasons for a kid's behavior, you consult with your specialists. That's what we're there for, is to work with you guys and to help you figure out why these kids are doing what they're doing and to come up with an action plan for it. So it's not like you're sort of adrift, good luck, you know, when you've run out of ideas, then call us in. There is a consultation process you can still have. If we understand the behavior, we're much more likely to be able to change it than if we don't understand it. Because we don't want to be just reacting to this behavior that's coming up. We don't want to be in a reactive state. We want to be very thoughtful about it and always, always thinking in terms of what are we going to teach them. Regardless of how bad the behavior is, of how off the wall it is, of what the situation is, we want them to be learning from the situation. It's always an opportunity for learning. And sometimes, very often, that learning about what happens with their behavior. So if, you know, like back to the guy who trashed the computer, he has to know, and this is part of his learning, is that if you are out in public and you wreck a store building, you're going to experience some pretty heavy-duty consequences. So we need you to understand that there is a consequence to that. But that's a teaching thing. That was well thought out. Like, we discussed that. And we came up with that as kind of a clear set of consequences for him. And we drew it out visually for him, and we showed him what would happen. That's really different than getting mad at the kid and punishing them for their behavior. This is really showing, because that's not really teaching them. Punishment is not teaching. Punishment is kind of a reaction, right? Often, it leads to, if you're really bent out of shape, you have to be careful you don't cross that line into like a vengeful kind of thought, right? Like, punishment can go that way. You have to be careful with it. But you have to always focus on the teaching piece of it. I want them to learn from this. So it isn't just about trying to get them to comply so you can teach the lesson. You're always teaching them. Your job is to be teaching them self-regulation, as well as teaching them academics. Academics is only part of the picture, right? That's, I mean, maybe I'm wrong with them, but I'm right, right? And usually, it's highly unlikely that the child wants to get you mad. It's highly unlikely that the child wants to impact people in a negative way. often they don't have the skills, or they're so escalated, they're kind of trigger happy, like they're always running at the highest level of the anxiety curve, and it doesn't take much to set them off. But that isn't usually what they want. They don't want people mad at them. They don't want to be in trouble. You know, they want to make things work for them. So, one of the first steps, and I'll go over this slide and then we'll have our lunch. I'm starting to get hungry. So one of the things, when we go to a school-based team meeting, and you're sitting down and you're telling about this kid that is really challenging you in the class, some of the things I do not, I'm going to change how I was going to say that. Some of the things that don't give me any information are words, descriptions that cast judgment on the child, but they don't tell me what's happening. So these are our words like, they were rude. What does that tell me about the situation? What does that tell me about what they did? What did that look like? Defiant. In what way were they defiant? What did they say to you? How were they standing? What happened before? What was the situation? Refuses. Could that not be task initiation difficulties? Like, what did that look like? How did they refuse? Explain it to me. Stubborn is another one. I hear a lot about these guys, and especially the ASD guys, because they get really stuck into their way of doing things. And stubborn could just be fear of change. Stubborn could be based in fear. Oppositional. And that, you know, that oppositional defiant disorder thing that we hear about, I absolutely hate that. Can you imagine your own kid being diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder? Like, talk about the most negative label. I think it should be thrown out of the DSM. But anyway, that's just me. So, what I like is a really detailed description of what you're going to see. So I asked the students twice to pull out their textbooks, and Johnny did not pull his out. Okay, so now we have a description of the situation. I might ask what happened before this if I needed to, because there's that, have you heard of ABC charts? Antecedent behavior consequences. The antecedent is what happened before the behavior is obviously the behavior itself, and the consequence is what was the result of the behavior, what happened because they did this behavior. That's a really important thing to be thinking about, because that's going to give us a lot of information about what's causing the behavior, what they're getting out of doing the behavior, and how that behavior is impacting others. So this might make me question whether there's a language processing piece there. Maybe there's a task initiation. Maybe it's comprehension in the processing part. Maybe it's slow processing. We don't know. But that's not necessarily refusal. A game of tag, when Becky's it, she shoved Joey in the back. That's nice and descriptive. Maybe it's because she doesn't really understand personal space. Maybe she's got some sensory issues and she doesn't know how, she's seeking out some deep pressure in the game of tag and using that opportunity to get some deep pressure for herself. Or maybe it is because she doesn't have perspective taking, she doesn't know how hard she's actually touching somebody. He said, I'm not doing it in a negative tone of voice. See, that's descriptive again. Is it because he's kind of a spectrum-y kid and he doesn't really understand nuances in voices, and he can't monitor his own tone of voice to come up with that perfect tone of voice? Is it because he doesn't understand the work? Is it because he's overwhelmed by the amount of work? So then again, back to that ABC thing, always consider what happened right before the negative behavior, because that's going to give us a lot of information about things that trigger that behavior in that particular kid. Now, this was interesting. The kid who threw the hockey stick at the teacher, he said to me, he was so determined that he be seen as not having thrown the hockey stick at the teacher. He was trying to convince himself and everybody else that he just dropped the hockey stick. Well, nobody, when they are that escalated, drops a hockey stick. When you're that escalated, it's going to be thrown. If you've got it in your hands and you're that mad, you're probably going to throw it. But I really needed to hear his perspective, and I didn't really judge his perspective. I mean, it wasn't really it was easy for me. It wasn't really my problem. I just had to listen to him and keep him out of the class because he was having an in-school suspension. But the point was he needed to be heard. He needed to be listened. So you always need to listen to them, because Their perspective might give you a lot of information on why they reacted the way they did. Their perspective might not be what happened. It might be a completely off perspective. They might even be lying. If they're lying, why are they lying? Are they lying because they feel bad about it and they want to change the story so they look better? Are they lying because they've convinced themselves it happened a different way? Are they lying because they don't want you to think badly of them? Lying does not necessarily come with evil intent, right? And we need to know what they're thinking too. The other thing is we need to notice what's happening in the environment. If we know that this kid has a lot of sensory issues, if they are overwhelmed by a lot of visual and there's a lot of visual clutter in the room, that might be something that's going to set them up into a more escalated state in general. So they might be a little more reactive in that state. There might be too much language in the instruction. Maybe you need to simplify your language a little bit when you're talking to them. That might be escalating them and setting them off. It might be about the relationship. For some kids, and actually it's true for a lot of kids on the spectrum, attachment, a connection to the adult that they're working with is absolutely critical. And I see this over and over again with kids, and not just spectrum kids, but with a lot of other kids. And I mean, they don't have to have attachment disorder for this to be important. A lot of kids absolutely need that attachment in order to learn from the person that they're with. This kid who threw the hockey stick, that attachment, he needed that attachment. I was told he was rude to women. He was lovely to me, but he was really attached to one of the staff members there, and she introduced me to him, so she did that attachment connection thing where she passed him off to me, and he was totally responsive to it. She said he's never been rude to her either. He was great, but that attachment piece, and I got a lot out of him in terms of looking at the consequence of behavior and all this stuff. We did a lot of work on that type of thing because he felt attached and he liked me, is basically what it comes down to. And you know that if the kids like you, they're going to learn from you. If they don't like you, there's nothing you can do. They cannot learn from you if they don't like you. So that's actually really important. And we actually had one little girl where the EA was new in the classroom. She'd only been there like a couple of weeks, and the little girl didn't know her at all. So the EA would come, and she would be going, "Go away, get away from me. I don't need you." And it sounded really rude and awful. But I mean, they were clued in to know that attachment is really important to her. So what do we do with that? The EA started taking her out to the sensory room and playing games with her and having fun with her. Well, that's going to build that attachment, and that she will then accept that EA's help because she'll have that connection with her and that attachment piece. Any questions before we break for lunch? Okay.